Thanks for being with us today. Let's get going. Matt Pfohl, would you like to introduce yourself and the presenters?
Sure. Thank you, Bill. My name is Matt Pfohl, Executive Vice President of Sopra Systems. We also have our great partners from Trenegy. Peter, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure. Peter Purcell. I am Managing Director at Trenegy and been serving oil and gas companies for the last 26 years between E&P and services companies. So understand both sides of transactions. Nicole?
Sure. Nicole Higle. I am a manager with Trenegy and have been helping both E&P and oilfield services companies for the last 7 years.
Thanks so much. So today's topic is really looking at nothing to do with product, really focusing in on kind of best practices related to ERP. A couple things quickly about that is that I think the big element really, if you look at the series, is really about the digital world, digital transformation. And so when we look at the kind of traditional pillars that can be disruptive or risk in a ERP implementation lifecycle, many of those elements have stayed the same as it relates to the risk factors. What has changed as it relates to when we think about it in a digital world, there are elements that we have to rethink a bit. And so today we'll be kind of going through some of those traditional elements, in addition talking about what we see as change, in particular from the Trenegy group that really helps organizations through that journey as it relates to not only selecting enterprise applications, but also the impact to the change management side, as well as in improving processes. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Peter, if you can, next slide, I'd like to just have you just give a quick snapshot on your organization.
Yeah, sure. The obligatory ad, right? So Trenegy is a non-traditional management consulting firm. We've been in business for 10 years. My business partner and I have been working with E&P and oilfield services companies probably for the last 25, 27 years. What Trenegy does is we focus on eliminating inefficiencies, and we know the root causes, right, in the industry. It's always around systems, it's around process and controls, and it's around acquisitions. And really today what we're going to be talking about is around, the activities around systems and process that need to be hit upon to be successful moving to a platform environment, which we'll cover in a minute.
Excellent. Thanks so much. So Peter, I'm going to come to you first, and then I'll talk a little bit about what we're seeing from the impact from the technology side of things. But you've been working in the space, although with this business 10 years, I know you've been around the space for 30 plus years. And I think you have tremendous perspective as it relates to what oil and gas services companies are dealing with right now in market pressures.
Yeah, thanks. Actually, I think it's no mystery to the folks that are on this session. E&P companies have been facing a lot of market pressure over the last few years. Everything from the push to renewables to the global economic push in 2015, 2016, 2017. Which definitely dropped the price of oil. These companies have all survived by leveraging technology, whether it's downhole technologies and even back office technologies, which is a lot about what we're talking about today, that have been extended now out to the field to eliminate inefficiencies and make sure that their investments are profitable. And moving to a platform is one of the key things that these companies have been doing, which is going to really make it necessary for oilfield services to follow.
Good deal. And what we're seeing because of these changes in the market, probably first and foremost when it comes to ERP, these were very closed systems in the past. And we're seeing a transition to very open architectures, obviously Microsoft being one of those. So what does this mean to us as it relates to making decisions and systems and that? And what it really means is that there's a lot more we have to take into consideration in the digital. Or one of the big elements is security, because we have that many more connection points. When you look at it from the ecosystem perspective, there's a massive demand from our customers driving us to integrate to their payment platforms or collaboration platforms. So, and then when we look at things from a data perspective, it's moving from a traditional report-based type of data model or even an internal data warehouse to cloud-based analytics so that we can get insight intelligence. So when you look at all this across this kind of digital journey, in particular when you look at ERP, these are all vulnerable connection points. So security becomes a very big issue. There's also a big need we're seeing change in kind of the RFPs over the last couple of years is really integration and the massive focus on integration as it relates to being core to ERP and how open and interoperative that connectivity can be. So as we move on to the next topic, which is really looking at some of the kind of risk areas and support. From a platform perspective, what we see is, and let's not talk about brands for the moment, but as it relates to the lens that we need to look through when we look at modernized systems, particular from an ERP perspective. And there's 4 pillars that we see as critically important. And as we say, this is not just for our ERP, but this is how you should be thinking about IT investments in the digital world. And so open, we talked a little bit about that as it relates to the interoperability between the ecosystems and your value chain with your partners, your suppliers, and your customers. But open is also the ability to integrate with other systems that we may have as it relates to control systems and so on. Connected, really being able to bring intelligence off our assets, both from getting into more of a predictive type of service model, as well as learning about how assets are performing and when parts may be replaced and so on. From an intelligent perspective, the big shift we're seeing, particularly on ERP, is moving from kind of standard, typical analytics, which is how do we perform, to really much more cognitive type of, so really leveraging technology to look at trends in the business, look at how we can improve on variances in the business, and ultimately what are new lines of opportunity that we can jump to. And then scale. Cloud provides tremendous scale. Peter, I'll go to you on this one. What are you seeing in your side of the market?
We see exactly the same thing. I mean, I think that again, if you were to take the brand out of the picture, if you look at the circle in the middle, we see that the core to making sure that you're fully integrated with, your customers or in E&P companies, supply chain experience, or whether you need your field tickets to be totally integrated with their approval process. You really need kind of a ERP in the middle to make that happen.
Yep, it's a good point. And many customers say, kind of, where do we start our journey? And what we find is that many are down the road from the flashy their technology, but they haven't gotten their house in order, and so it becomes a very difficult journey as it relates to those risk factors we talked about earlier. And so the importance as it relates to modernizing your ERP and kind of back end is critically important to build that foundation for digital impact. So if we move on to the next topic here, when we look at it from a statistical perspective and kind of what is the likelihood of success of ERP implementations, and then we're going to kind of look at the factors of why these statistics are like this. I'll go to the panel for input.
Sure. So based on research that we've done, and you've seen numbers like this from Gartner, Forrester, and just a variety of places. But unfortunately, even within the oilfield services and E&P space, it always seems that ERP implementations just don't go well. And primarily, it's either the cost is overrun or budget is completely blown. And what we found, and the purpose of this presentation, you'll see us dive a little deep here in a minute, is if you do some things up front before you start an ERP implementation, there's just a few things that you need to do to help mitigate these numbers. And it does require a little bit of effort. It requires focus. And it does take people out of their day-to-day jobs. So, they may not be responding to RFIs from, larger E&P companies, or, they may not be, sending people out, scheduling, crews to go out to the wellhead and that kind of thing. But, these are pretty scary statistics, but they're realistic statistics. And, our goal today, our goal as Trenegy is to help our clients avoid becoming a casualty like this. Working with people like Sophros and with Sophros pretty exclusively, but also today, hopefully the information we give you can help mitigate some of this as well.
Yeah, and I think the other element that's important about this is that it doesn't really matter size of business. This notion that that ERP or whatever, main ticketing system, whatever, that a system is going to be the silver bullet. If you don't fundamentally take some of the actions that we're going to talk about here shortly, technology is not going to get you there. If anything, it can get you in a negative trend faster if you don't properly plan for the impact and get engagement, from all key stakeholders. So let's move on to the next topic here. So when you look at implementation risk factors, Peter, from your perspective, these are, I would imagine, some of the big ones that you see.
Bottom line is, look, there's hundreds of risks and hundreds of things that you have to manage in an ERP implementation for it to go well and mitigate all the risk. And we certainly don't have time to go through all of those today. And to Matt's point, it doesn't matter if you're $100 million in revenue or you're $100 billion in revenue. The risks are all pretty close to the same. I think that based on our experience and just the experience that my business partner and I've had doing ERP implementations for the last 30 years, and we started back in the days of tape drives, which is kind of scary, is that if you can get a handle on these 5 things up front before an ERP implementation, you actually start way, way ahead of the game. And it also allows you to start the implementation doing some pretty neat things. But one, basically the competing organizational priorities always distract people. And yeah, ERP is new at the beginning, but then a month in, other things happen, and we just don't care anymore, or the focus isn't there anymore. Not clearly understanding what the business requirements are before starting the implementation. And in the old days, to Matt's point, it was always very internal, right? And ERP was a very internally focused. So how you ran your AP, or how did you manage your approval process, and how did you get get the company man's signature out the door? That was always, internal. But in today's world, where, you saw the Uberization or the platformation of working across technologies, you can't really do that anymore. Getting your business requirements, external and in under the context of a platform is huge. Master data, huge. Boring, but or boring is the wrong term, but maybe just a lot of work. But getting a good master data governance model in place and getting your master data cleaned up, because in a platform, when you're working internally with an internal focus, if there are a few errors, no big deal. But if you're working in a platform world and you start sending your customer bad data or bad errors, you used the wrong price list, so you didn't charge right for the wireline services or the cementing services, or you just don't collect right for a P&A job. That can really add up. The other thing is just making implementation decisions really, really quickly. Look, we all know business moves, and what's true today may not be true tomorrow. So you got to do that. You can't get into analysis paralysis. Just delays the implementation. And lastly is getting employees to clearly understand the benefits of the new world, and it becomes critical when you're changing people's way of doing things from kind of this internal focus that we talk about to going across a platform. Huge mindset change. And so don't move it, Bill, but as we move forward, we hope that we'll show you how you can kind of knock each one of these risk factors off.
Yeah, and I'd just like to kind of summarize this particular, Peter, because it's so to the point what you're saying as it relates to this digital platform world. The fundamental difference that we see is that historically system projects, kind of in the beginning get endorsement from leadership, and then leadership kind of moves on to other things. And in the kind of connected world, in the digital world, the need to treat these type of projects and tie them specifically to strategic plans and initiatives is paramount. And if you want to actually effectively transition into this digital world. So with that, let's move into some of the organizational support items. I think the big thing that I think we see in the market is really about this concept of, kind of that what I talked about earlier, which is, systems are the silver bullet. And actually successful strategies start with the business side. And ultimately, the better we define the business side, the business outcome, the business value that we're looking to achieve, the more successful the technical side gets. And so it's important for us to get our people thinking differently about things like ERP. So Nicole, let me go to you on this topic.
Sure. So when you start to think of how to draw in organizational support for adopting a platform operating model, that support, it really needs to start with setting the tone at the top leadership level. And this really does help drive the digital strategy. So depending on where you are from a digital maturity standpoint, entering the digital space and implementing a new ERP can really have pretty significant impacts on an organization's existing processes. So if you think about it, a lot of companies in the oilfield services space still have a pretty good amount of processes that are still being done manually. And asking people to move from what they're doing today manually on pen and paper to a digital environment is really going to require a lot of change across all of the business functions, especially from the operations team. So in our experience, what you need to do in order to be successful is to really focus on building that organizational support and driving that change directly from the office of the COO. So from what we've seen at other companies, it's always pretty easy to get support and buy-in from CEOs and CFOs to accept these digital changes, but it's typically the hardest to convince the COOs to adopt and drive those changes solely because of the massive impact that the changes are going to have on their people and their side of the organization.
Excellent. Thanks so much. I think here, just to set this slide up, the big element is it says there that we're seeing changing and really kind of customers that are focused on that have a digital agenda and ERP as part of that agenda is much more focused around business outcomes. Historically, what we looked at is, how we were currently using ERP, how we currently ran our business, and very focused on that as kind of our requirements, versus in the digital world, because we're many times looking at data to give us intelligence about where we should be, how we should be doing things, and how we optimize kind of the business. You're seeing a shift in how requirements are being done to much more outcomes-driven type of requirements gathering versus traditional, this is how we do things, or this is current state and future state type of discussion. So I'm going to go to you, Peter, on this one.
Sure. So to drive a little deeper, I mean, for those of you on the call who've done a ERP implementation in the past, you've had consultants, like us. Well, we're non-traditional, so it wasn't us, but somebody like us walk in the door with a notebook thick list of requirements that they thought that the ERP should address. How do GL postings get approved? How does an AP invoice get routed for approval? How do you add a inventory item? Who owns the approval of that? And then there's always an argument between whether or not AP or some other organization needs to manage the supplier table, because you don't want AP to be able to write checks, an AP clerk to update a table to write checks that they to a supplier they put in. So even as I describe that, I find myself, my eyes starting to close, thinking, wow, that really is kind of very, very old world thinking and internal thinking. In the new world, we really have to think across the platform and think outside. It really doesn't matter how an AP clerk gets an AP invoice in the system, because in an integrated or an AR clerk's even better, right? But in an integrated platform, if you're integrated into your customers, you have integrated RFI through contract letting and billing and collections all through, with company man signature and approvals all through your EMP customer supplier experience portal. And then on your side, hopefully you do have, you're also making your suppliers be part of this platform, because to Matt's point, you're going to want to present data to your customers that show, essentially, in some cases, maybe what you paid for consumables and did you mark them up properly, in the end for reimbursement. But looking at these requirements from beginning to end and in a platform environment is critical. And it can be a little challenging, because people have the natural tendency to look internally. Then the last part of all of this is, as we talk about organization a little bit, a lot of companies have grown through acquisition, and the relevance there is that the old owners are sometimes kept around, and the old owners will oftentimes run a service line. And you'll have multiple owners running the same service line, in different basins. Well, one of the things that you have to do from a critical requirements basis is to get them to do everything the same, right? Now, different price lists for obviously different customers, different basins, and all that. But developing those critical requirements to kind of help drive change, to standardize, even when your organization hasn't necessarily been completely integrated, is pretty critical.
That's great feedback. So let's, as we move on to the next slide here, when we look at team, I think this is a great point here, which is so often we work with companies that, it's an IT initiative or a T-led project. And the reality is that it should be a business and IT together led project, and not just from do we need to change, who are we going to change with, but truly as we look at making decisions in that process. I'll give it a good example of that is that, and Peter brought this up in the last slide, is that what we're seeing companies do is when we do requirements definition, when we're looking at business outcomes, traditionally we may go to that single stakeholder, single subject matter expert, but what you're seeing companies now look at bringing other people in that value chain into those discussions. So someone potentially from the selling side, someone from the delivery side, sitting in on some of these type of meetings, so that we're getting more of a higher value capture in the value chain as we're making decisions around ERP. So Nicole, let me go to you specifically on what you're seeing as it relates to key elements with teams.
Yeah, so when implementing a digital strategy, it really has the potential to put a lot of pressure and a lot of stress on the organization. So making sure that you have the right team members committed to the success of the project and of the transition is pretty critical. when you think about selecting an internal team, it needs to be a team that's made up of people who have, like you said, Matt, cross-functional knowledge of the business and know exactly what the customers are asking for. So these are team members who are going to ultimately be responsible to ensure that both the internal business requirements and the external customer-driven requirements are met by the new system and the new tools. And they'll be the ones who are responsible for executing the digital strategy as has been determined by the company's leadership team. Something else to think about is this digital strategy team will also serve as champions to the ERP project and will be responsible for carrying out key messaging surrounding the implementation and the top-down direction. And they'll continue to support that strategy before, during, and after the transition to the go live. So it's imperative to identify and commit the right people to participate on this team.
Great, thanks so much. So as we look at next topic, which is really around data, Peter talked about this earlier about being a boring, painful kind of process, which I would agree. I think what is interesting, it's becoming a much interesting and exciting part of the process, because the fact when you look at that master data and how we think about data today, it's really in the context of an all-up data strategy. And so it makes us rethink about the importance of the data that's needed as it relates to what we bring over, but also in the context of what Peter said in that broader ecosystem, what is the impact it's going to have to our business or to our partners, and is there value in that kind of all-up strategy? So, Peter, with that, I'm going to go to you.
Yeah. So, when you're in a platform environment, IT, people often forget about the I in the IT, right? The information part. But master data really is the lifeblood of a platform, and it truly is the key driver of everything. For example, if you have a price list on an RFI that you've submitted and it's on a contract, you need to make sure that price list makes it all the way out onto the field ticket, so that the pusher or the field engineer or the mud engineer, whatever business you're in, knows exactly what to charge, knows exactly what service to provide. I mean, and this reduces DSO, reduces contract leakage and the like, but it's all driven by master data. So if the item data, the customer data, or whatever is wrong, your ability to operate in a platform environment is completely limited. So, we recommend always is, set up a data governance model. And then once you get a good data governance model in, so you know who owns data, who's responsible for accuracy, who's going to be responsible for entry, maintenance, that kind of thing. Getting that master data cleaned up is very, very critical. The good news is, in today's world, there are a ton of technology tools out there. We actually use a couple of Microsoft tools. I know this is a Microsoft event and we're not supposed to talk tools, but we actually really like the Microsoft tools, which is why we're here. We use a variety of tools to help our clients do a lot of master data cleanup. And if for some reason, folks don't get to this, I will tell you that when you get to data conversion on an ERP implementation, this turns your implementation from what's conceivably a fun, strategic, and value-added exercise to almost nightmare status. And maybe I should use more politically correct terms, but nightmare status pretty fast. So when you can get a handle on this up front, it's really awesome, and it is critical for a platform, because your ERP essentially acts as a huge master data management engine in that ecosystem.
Yeah, a couple other points I'll add to this. So I think the way we look at this is a lot different than when we used to. We go off, our technical teams go off for months on end and hold the project up forever to get that data to a perfect state, and then we load all this data over. And today, both on how systems are and for example, like us as a company that uses agile process, What we're able to do is work with customers in more incremental kind of data movement, so that when we look at different stages of what we need in a ERP rollout, it gives us a longer runway on a data strategy and moving that historical data. It allows us in more of an agile sprint process to look at the impact of some of those data decisions. And then many times we're leveraging a data warehouse to be able to bring that data in. So when we look at kind of what do we need from after we put the cleansing, the strategy, and kind of the prioritization of data into a plan, and we look at what do we need for go live, we bring that other data into a data warehouse, which gives us time to look at improving our data usage, data structures, and so on. And so in the digital world, it is as much tools, but it's also about practice and process, and working with customers through that digital journey as it relates to an ERP implementation, which is much different than how we used to do it in the past. So I'm going to move on to the next slide here, which is really about communication. I think the big thing here from our perspective is really about when you look at it from a culture perspective, and when we look at getting our people excited and really the kind of elements of they're scared, they're nervous about the impact of change. I think it's important for us to take the opportunity when we look at a large project like ERP, is getting our people to think different and really thinking less from a feature function perspective and more from a value-based thinking. And ultimately realizing that we have to do things differently, and doing things differently is healthy. So it's a different way of looking at change management. It's an opportunistic rather way of looking at how is the value of the opportunity for that individual. How does my role in the organization create value in the entire value chain for our customers and for our other employees and so on. So with that, I'm going to go to Peter and Nicole for thoughts on really the communication and kind of change impact.
Yeah, so depending on where your company falls on the digital maturity scale, we found that the more you communicate, the better off you're going to be, and the more likely people will actually use the new tools as they've been designed to support the digital platform. Going back to getting the office of the COO to drive organizational support, the most critical personnel to focus on in communication is the field operations folks, in our opinion, based on what we've seen with other companies. Operations is always the last to do away with their manual and pen and paper processes, and often they have the largest hurdle to overcome with these new business process changes. So when pen and paper are their comfort zone, they tend to have some trouble working in an electronic and in a more integrated environment. So helping them to understand the importance in changing the way they think and why it's important to stay connected to the customer and the customer's tools is also very critical.
Great. So as we look at kind of final thoughts with this particular series, Peter, I'll go to you, and then I might give some closing thoughts as well.
Sure. I mean, I think that hopefully what we've done is a pretty good job of explaining that this pre-work that we're talking about really does help address a lot of tactical barriers to an implementation, but more importantly, it really sets you up strategically, right? Moving to a digital environment from the current environment can actually be quite stressful, and it's going to be necessary. E&P companies are forcing it. I can't tell you how many of my clients right now are going through selections, both from ERP and field ticketing, because they're having to respond to their E&P customers and to operate within this type of environment. I think that in the last session that we had, if you guys were on the call, and if you weren't, I'd highly recommend you listen to it. The links are out there. We talked about digital maturity and digital strategy. If you do this pre-work, it will really, really help you, validate that you're moving to the right digital maturity from a platform perspective. You're moving to the correct place there, and that your digital strategy is really fairly well defined. And once you get some of these more tactical pre-work things done, then as you move forward, then you can start doing all the fun stuff in getting your platform going, right? And putting this foundation in place, the reporting and analytics, process improvement, and all those other things. The bottom line is you want to make this easy for your customer, even over, if you will, sometimes, the ease of your people. Streamlining internally may not necessarily mean it's what's best for your people. It really has to be streamlined and the processes changed so it's best for your customer. But anyway, anything to add to that, Matt?
Yeah, I would just say I think the biggest lost opportunity we see is many times we get ourselves in a situation where it's a forced, what we call lift and shift. So to your point, there's market conditions, there's customers that all of a sudden we haven't dealt with modernization, we haven't planned for it, and so we get caught on this kind of lift and shift mode. And so as a result of that, we've got to move from older ERP to newer ERP, and we don't spend the time needed to really put a plan together as it relates to the impact of that. And probably the big element of that, or the opportunity, I should say, is as we get further down the roles within the organization, the clarity on the mission is non-existent. And I think that's the biggest miss we see, is that if companies take the time to clearly articulate what the mission is, not a mission statement, but mission as it relates to why we're making this investment, how my role can impact that, and why it's important, the success as it relates to different risk factors, as well as the engagement that we'll have with our teams, will be much, much richer. So I think we'll go to Q&A, Bill.
Yeah, we've got a couple of questions that have already been submitted, but I just want to let everyone know if you have some questions, either about the topics that have already been covered or other topics related to successful ERP implementation, just go ahead and type them into the questions box in your GoToWebinar panel, and we'll add them in. So first question, Matt, I think this is for you because I think you were the one that mentioned it. Kurt asked, he said, you mentioned Agile. I thought that was more about software development. Is that related to ERP?
So yes, it is. It's a little different than I would say code development agile from the standpoint. It's more of an iterative process. There are elements of more traditional waterfall in the beginning as it relates to kind of how requirements are done. But when we get into the build stage, it is very agile as it relates to doing build sprints. We're doing validation with individuals, which creates training opportunity. And we're solving and validating our decisions in an iterative process, so that we're not getting down a path so far that we said, we did requirements, or we work with Trenegy to provide those requirements, and then 3 months later we come back with a solution, and you all are like, wow, that's not what we were thinking. So we're finding that really business applications in general, agile concepts, agile lean kind of practices are critically important, mitigate risk tremendously, and helps you get engagement early and often, and makes the go live process a kind of a non-event.
I was going to say, so about a year ago, Matt actually helped us write an article. We have an article on our website on this topic specifically. How do you transition from waterfall to agile? When do you use both? So if you want a lot more detail, either Matt can send you something, or we can send something out. Great.
I'll grab a link to that article and send it out in the follow-up message after this event. That's great.
Yeah, because Matt helped us write that article.
Okay. So David says, how do you redefine processes before the implementation when the software isn't in place?
So between Sophos and us, absolutely. I mean, so we have worked with just about any type of oilfield service out there, or oilfield service company out there, and we've worked with a lot of E&P companies, so we understand both sides of the transaction. We often know what's coming down the pike from the E&P companies, sometimes before they even announce it, because we've helped them with defining their future state processes and their requirements, their upcoming requirements from a platform perspective. So yeah, we can help with that.
Great. It looks like we have a short Q&A session today. We just had those 2 questions come through. Thank you for attending the 5 tips to a successful ERP implementation in oilfield services.